from the side, whatever you might want to say, and I watched him not turn one kid off. Every kid that asked him for an autograph got one. We've known him for a few years, and he was just a spectacular personality. Befits him or the occasion for us, real good. I wouldn't have asked for him to be here or even try to garner it coming along just because of who he is, but for his personality, because we met him a few years back, and he's just another great American hero, and we always cherish those heroes because they're gone. But here's one right with us. We thank him, and we thank you for being out to support us tonight. Thank you.
I wasn't going to do this, but my real, my days in the Navy, I had a lot of commanding officers. I really only have one commanding officer, and she sent me back up here. So. I didn't want to hog the program and stand up here too long, but she said, "Why didn't you take some questions?" And I do understand that when people come to hear an astronaut, sometimes they want to hear about flying in space. I didn't talk too much about that. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take just a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, and I'd like to entertain some questions from the audience. There must be something that somebody is curious about flying in space. If so, let me have those right now. And I'll just do this just for a couple of minutes, and then I'll get off so that we can move on with the rest of the program. Now is not the time to be shy. I see one hand right here. Yes, ma'am.
How do they determine how much weight on bodies to put in the shuttle for the shuttle to be able to go?
Okay, how do they determine how much weight to put in the shuttle? Well, several things come into play. Now, it depends on where you're going in orbit, and that depends on how much fuel you have to carry, what kind of velocity you have to achieve, and in order to get the orbit to where you want it. If you're going to the International Space Station, for example, that's at a higher inclination and higher altitude. You're going to need more fuel, therefore you can carry less weight. Okay? If you're going just in the Earth orbit at a lower inclination, then you can carry less fuel, which means you can carry more weight or more payload. And the payload, of course, is all of the equipment and things that we carry in the orbit. Columbia, for example, was at an orbit of 39 degrees inclination. What the inclination means is if you imagine a globe, imagine the equator going around the globe, the inclination is the angle that the orbital path makes with the equator. Just imagine that. So Columbia was at 39 degrees. It means every time they circle the Earth and they cross the equator, the angle at which they crossed the equator was 39 degrees. Space Station was up at 51.6 degrees. It's a higher inclination. The space station is also at a higher altitude. It takes more fuel to get to that higher altitude and higher inclination. Therefore, space station flights typically carry less weight in cargo than they carry when they're going to a lower inclination. Same with an airplane. You're going to take one of these airplanes and fly from here to Miami, Florida. You need more gas. So you carry less baggage and less people than if you're going to take one of these airplanes and fly just to Chicago. Same thing. That's a wonderful question. Let me ask some others. Yes?
Would you care to comment on the disaster, the shuttle disaster?
Would I care to comment? Well, I could. I'm not sure exactly what to say because I think everybody knows what happened with the Columbia. Initially, it was suspected that foam broke off from the external tank, the struts that connect the external tank to the orbiter, and that foam hit the left wing. Well, it's been confirmed that's what happened. They initially thought the foam hit the underside of the wing and damaged the tiles, but it really hit what's called a reinforced carbon-carbon. It's we call it RCC, reinforced carbon-carbon. It's the material along the leading edge of the left wing. That foam was only about the size of a briefcase, they say. It's very, very light, but at those speeds, it was already at, they were already supersonic, I believe, going 500-something miles per hour. At that speed, the foam damaged the wing. So the wing was damaged during the entire flight. When they re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, the vehicle encounters temperatures upwards of about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And those temperatures just ate into the wing, cut the fuselage, cut the wing structure, and then once it begins falling apart, the whole thing just sort of self-destructs. Now, the question that the board had to answer is what factors led up to it, what human factors. And there's some questions about the maintenance procedures. The mission management team didn't need as much as they should have. The engineers didn't elevate the problem to management. Management didn't take the problem seriously. Management did not use all assets to examine the vehicle when it was on orbit. So the report is 248 actually, pages long, and I'm plowing through the whole report myself. So there's just so much to it, just a real tragic loss. And NASA will do what it can to fix the loss. Kennedy Space Center is on a retreat right now, the director of the Space Center. They're having a management retreat as we speak this weekend to talk about return to flight. And I'll be involved in return to flight in one respect or another to get the remaining 3 shuttles back up and get them flying again. So real tragic event. The next hand I saw was this gentleman right here. Yes, sir.
What's the sensation on liftoff from Earth? What does that feel like?
The sensation on liftoff from Earth is really a dynamic ride. You've been lying on your back for about 4 hours, and yes, if you see on TV, the thing does sit up on its back. You crawl in it, and you lie down looking up with your feet up in the air. So you're real uncomfortable. You got that big bulky suit on. You've been lying there. And you have several tests that you go through over the 4 hours. They do some ground testing. Anyway, as the clock counts down, and you can watch it counting down on your displays in front of you, at 7 seconds, the ground launch sequencer takes over. That's the computer that controls the launch. The main engines have to be ignited within 0.25 seconds of each other. So a human being can't do that, but the computers can. The computers light the engines, you watch them to be sure they come up to speed properly. When those space shuttle main engines come up to speed, the solid rocket boosters light. And when those solids light, Jack, you going somewhere. No doubt in your mind, you're going somewhere. Hopefully you go where you want to go. When the thing hits zero, it's sitting there straining against the engines, and it twangs, it moves back and forth a little because the engines are trying to push it up. When it hits zero, explosive bolts, pyrotechnics fire, explode the bolts apart that are holding it down, and it sort of leaps off the pad. If you watch it on TV, it looks like it's going in slow motion. In real life, it kicks you in the back. It sort of leaps off the pad, kicks you. And by the time you pass the top of the tower, you're going faster than 100 miles per hour. The first stage, first 2 minutes, is really a bumpy ride. The thing is shaking and vibrating. It's vibrating real heavily. I remember on my first flight, I was in the flight engineer's seat, and I had gauges to watch. And I remember they were vibrating and jumping up and down. I'm thinking to myself, I'm supposed to read these gauges? Vibrating like that? After the first stage, after 2 minutes, it smooths out. The solids are done. They're jettisoned away from the vehicle, parachute back into the water, and you know this, we reuse. And you continue into space on the main engines. And it's a smooth ride, but it just accelerates, just faster and faster and faster and faster. It's the most amazing thing you ever felt. You get up to about 3 Gs, 3 times your body weight, because 3 times your body weight over about 6.5 minutes. It just goes faster and faster and faster and faster until you get to space and you experience the main engine cutoff. And you go from 0 to around 18,000 miles per hour in about 8.5 minutes. You smoking. You are really moving. We circle the Earth once every 90 minutes. You got 45 minutes of daylight followed by 45 minutes of nighttime over and over and over again. It's just incredible. Let me take one more. There must be some kids. Do we have any students in the audience? Question? No kids. Okay, I'll tell you, I'll take an adult kid. There was a hand way in the back. Yes, ma'am, by the truck. Real loud. Yeah, you know, and I think everybody heard the question. Gordon Cooper saw the Firefly things on his re-entry. I really don't remember what that was. It could have been water. It could have been ice dissipating off the vehicle and flashing in the light or something like that. It wasn't anything that was unexplainable. Whatever it wasn't an anomaly. It's just something. So they saw it for the very first time. What we do in space is we use fuel cells to make electricity. A byproduct of those fuel cells is water. We make more water than we use, so we dump it out. You have to do a fuel cell water dump. And the water, when it dissipates in space, it vaporizes. If you've got lights on the vehicle shining out, it'll splash off of that water. So it could have been water. That's probably what it was. Or ice crystals. Water will freeze and then dissipate in ice and flash into bright spots like that. So. But we haven't seen anything in space really that's unusual or weird. The most weird stuff I see is down here on Earth. I'll take one more and then I'll sit down. Yes, sir, right here.
I was just wondering if you could comment as they're reviewing the design of the Columbia orbiter or the Columbia style orbiter, and they're starting to come up with a new kind of design. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the next type of orbiter design?
Yeah, NASA has talking about the next design for a replacement of the space shuttle, and NASA had several false starts on designs for the space shuttle. They had what's called the X-33, the Delta Clipper, some years. In fact, McDonnell Douglas was leading on when McDonnell Douglas was still up and operating as an independent agency. What we like to see is, well, let's back up just a little bit. It has several false starts, and the newest replacement is what's going to be called the orbital space plane. There's no design on the drawing boards yet. Money has gone out for requests for proposals from different companies to submit bids for what they think the design ought to be for the orbital space plane. Now, the orbital space plane will initially start out to be just a lifeboat. It will be a very small device that will allow crews to come home from the International Space Station to Earth. It may land like a shuttle. It may land on parachutes. It may land on land. It may land on water. Nobody knows at this point. At some point, though, they want the orbital space plane to evolve into a launch vehicle to take people up and back as true replacement for the space shuttle. What NASA would like to see is a single stage to orbit vehicle, because part of the problem you run into is with staging. Remember I talked about first stage and second stage? Your difficulty comes when you transition from one stage to another. So if you can develop engines, a single set of engines that take you from Earth all the way into orbit, then that simplifies the problem and increases the safety. So I think what we'll probably see is some kind of single stage to orbit vehicle. It may launch vertically. It may launch horizontally. We're looking at magnetic levitation to accelerate a vehicle to high speed and then propel it up in the air. It may launch off of the bottom of a mothership like the X-1, X-15, and those airplanes did. You take up to high altitude in a jet, drop it off, and then ignite the engines that can go into space. There are a number of concepts that are being looked at. It will probably be a vehicle that will land on a runway because we want to reuse it again. You can put it on parachutes, but parachutes don't give you the same integrity on landing that you do when you put it onto a runway. So I would say single stage to orbit, go to the International Space Station, dock, come home, land like a space shuttle on the runway, lifting body concepts, where you have the real big body and the real short stubby wing, is what I think is going to happen for orbital space plane. I said I was going to take one more, right? I see a hand right here, and this will be my last one. Thanks. Yeah, and my answer to you is I really don't know exactly. What I would say is the question, I think everybody heard it, was as a teacher, how do you get students involved with an experiment on board the space station or aboard the space shuttle? It needs to be sponsored through a school or educational institution, and you would start by contacting NASA. NASA has a head, for the first time, a head for education at NASA headquarters. This is a new position, relatively new. And you can go online at www.nasa.gov.gov and then navigate to education and find out who that person is. And I would start with an email to that office, and they will email you back. And they're really pretty good about it with what you need to do to get an experiment on board the shuttle. Experiments are manifested years ahead of time, and obviously they're none manifested right now because return to flight is going to be the primary objective. So, and then the International Space Station construction is next objective. So flights and payloads are all pushed out some. But your experiment needs to be sponsored, obviously, through an organization like a university, for example. You can't just get a bunch of kids together and say we're going to put experiments in. It needs to be through WashU or or whatever, you know, some of the local universities. But they will let you know what the proper procedures are to apply for a space on board the space shuttle or the International Space Station. More than likely it will be what's called a getaway special, where they put the experiment. It has to be automated, putting inside of a gas can, a little can on the inside of the shuttle's bay. And it can be operated either manually by the astronauts. Astronauts may operate your experiment, or it may be operated by computer. So anyway, www.nasa.gov, that's the way to do it. Okay, I appreciate, I wish I could stand up here more, a little longer, because I love talking about the program and love entertaining questions, but I think we do have the rest of the program to move on to. So let me just thank you again. You've been a wonderful audience, and I appreciate your hospitality.
Thank you, Captain Scott. We really appreciate it. I told you he was a gracious man. He answered the questions that we were all going to kind of corner him and ask those things, and saved all those kinds of questions. And we really appreciate you coming back up. Now let's get it back over to the guy that's really in charge of this whole affair. He knows what's going on.